The county has 140 registered storm shelters, and for 6 years it was my job to make sure every one of them was safe to hold the people who ran into them. That's the whole job, really. Inspector for the County Emergency Management Office. I checked ventilation, door seals, structural integrity, capacity ratings, the little things nobody thinks about until a wall of wind is coming at their house at 2 in the afternoon. Concrete cracks, latches rust. Somebody builds a shelter in 1980 and then dies, and the new owners don't even know it's rated for public use. So I drove the county with a clipboard and a moisture meter and a checklist, and I signed off on the places where strangers would someday crowd together and pray. People don't understand how ordinary the work is. You'd think a job about disaster would feel dramatic. It doesn't. It's mostly driving. It's mostly paperwork. You show up at a farmhouse at 10 in the morning, and the owner meets you in the yard, and you go down into a poured concrete room under the ground, and you run your fingers along the seams and you write down numbers. You check that the door swings both ways in case debris piles against it. You check that the vent pipe isn't packed with a wasp nest, because people suffocate that way more than they die from the storm itself. You check the capacity rating against the square footage, because in a real event, people cram in past what's safe, and you want the margin to be honest. It's careful, patient work, and the reward for doing it right is that nothing happens. Nobody ever calls to thank you for a wall that didn't fall. I'm telling you all this because I need you to understand that I was good at it, and I was not a nervous person. I've been inside shelters during actual sirens. I've stood in a poured concrete box under a church while the pressure changed in my ears, and a sound like a freight train came apart directly overhead. And I stayed calm, and I watched the seams, because that was my job, even while it was happening. I did not scare. That matters, because of what I have to tell you about shelter number 107. The registry is a database. Every shelter has a number, an address, GPS coordinates, a capacity, an owner of record, an inspection history. When I started, the retiring inspector walked me through it over 2 weeks, and he was thorough, almost fussy, and I appreciated it. His name was Hollis. He'd done the job for 19 years, and he had that quality some old tradesmen have, where he couldn't hand you anything without also handing you the story of it. This shelter flooded in '04. Watch the sump. This one, the owner's a talker, budget an extra hour. This one out on Reller Road, call ahead or the dog will take your arm off. He wrote notes in the margins of everything. He color-coded. He cared in the specific way of a man who is about to stop being responsible for something and wants to leave it in good hands. And in the whole 2 weeks, he never once mentioned 107. I found it myself, about 4 months in, doing a routine reconciliation. The county requires every shelter to be physically inspected every 18 months, and the software flags anything overdue. I ran the report on a slow afternoon just to get ahead of my schedule, and 107 was flagged. Last inspection, never. Not overdue by a year, not lapsed, blank. A registered shelter with a number, a capacity of 40, and coordinates that had apparently never been visited by anyone in the entire life of the database. That's not unheard of. Records get sloppy. A shelter gets built, registered on paper, and then somehow never enters the physical rotation because whoever set it up left, or the file got orphaned in a migration. We'd changed database systems twice in 15 years, and things fall through in a migration. So I pulled the coordinates and I plugged them into my truck's GPS, and I drove out there on a clear Tuesday to close the gap. That's all it was to me, a gap to close. A tidy person's satisfaction in making a report read the way it's supposed to. The coordinates put it on the northeast corner of a county maintenance yard off Highway 9, a fenced gravel lot where they keep the plows and the salt and a couple of decommissioned water tanks. I'd been there before for other reasons. I knew the yard supervisor, a guy named Delroy, decent man, coming up on retirement himself. I waved at him and told him I was looking for a storm shelter that was supposed to be on his property. He laughed and said there wasn't one, and he'd know. He'd worked that yard for 22 years. I showed him my tablet with the little pin sitting right on the northeast corner, and he walked out there with me, and we stood on the gravel, and there was nothing there, just fence and weeds and the back of a salt shed. He was nice about it. He said the county's records were a joke, and I should tell my office to fix their map. I agreed with him. I even remember making a small joke about how they paid me to find shelters that weren't there. I made a note to flag 107 as a probable data error and recommend it for removal from the registry. I want you to notice that I did the reasonable thing. Every single step of this, I did the reasonable thing. I did not think it was a ghost. I thought it was a typo. The recommendation to delete a shelter has to be approved by the emergency management director, a woman named Carol Weaver, who had been in that office longer than anyone, longer even than Hollis. I submitted it with the others in my monthly batch, a routine cleanup of dead records, a couple of shelters that had been demolished, one that had been sold and converted to a root cellar, that kind of thing. Everything else went through within a day. 107 came back rejected, with a one-line comment in the system: do not remove, verified active. Verified by whom? I didn't know. There was no inspection attached, no field report, no name, just those 3 words and a rejection stamp. I went to Carol's office and asked her about it, and she was pleasant and a little too quick, and she said the shelter was on private easement and hard to access, and that the previous inspector had an arrangement, and I shouldn't worry about it. I said I'd stood on the exact coordinates with Delroy, and there was a salt shed there and nothing else. She said the coordinates were probably off, that a lot of the older ones were off, entered back when they used a handheld unit that could be 100 feet wrong on a bad day. That's a real thing. I'd seen coordinates off by that much before. So it landed as plausible, even though something about how fast she reached for it sat wrong with me. And then she changed the subject to some budget nonsense about fuel reimbursement, and she was warm and funny about it, and I left her office feeling like I'd been handled by a professional and not quite able to say how. So I let it sit, for a while, a couple of months. I had 139 other shelters that actually existed and needed my attention, and it's easy to let one blank record slide to the bottom of a list when the top of the list is full of real concrete and real people. The thing that brought it back was the weather. Late May, we had our first real outbreak of the season, a supercell that dropped a tornado warning on the western half of the county around 4 in the afternoon. My job during an actual warning is mostly to be reachable. The shelters are the shelters. They don't need me while they're being used. But we have a monitoring dashboard that shows which registered public shelters have reported occupancy, because after the all clear, I coordinate any post-event structural checks. Some shelters have a simple button, a manual head count entry punched in by whoever's got the key. The newer public ones have a door sensor that counts entries. It's crude. It's mostly so we know where people were in case anything collapsed, and we need to account for who might be under it. During that warning, sitting at my kitchen table with the dashboard open on my laptop and the sky going that flat green outside my window, I watched Shelter 107 report an occupancy of 31. I want to be precise about what I felt, because it wasn't fear, not yet. It was the specific irritation of a professional watching a system produce impossible data. A shelter that didn't exist was reporting that 31 people had gone into it. I actually laughed out loud, alone in my kitchen. I thought, the sensors shorted, or the records linked to some other building's hardware, or somebody at the office fat-fingered a manual entry into the wrong field. I screenshotted it, timestamp and all, because I knew nobody would believe how badly that record was corrupted, and I wanted evidence for the ticket I was going to file with IT. The warning expired at 5:40. I refreshed the dashboard. 107 read, occupancy 0. The next morning I drove back out to the maintenance yard. I don't fully know why I made it a priority instead of just filing the IT ticket. I told myself I was going to physically trace the sensor wiring, find whatever real device was misreporting under that number, because if hardware somewhere was throwing bad data during a live warning, that was a genuine problem worth solving. Delroy wasn't there. It was a Saturday. The gate chained shut. I parked on the shoulder of Highway 9 and walked the fence line to the northeast corner on foot. Salt shed, weeds, nothing. But the weeds were flat. There was a path worn through them, from the fence to the back of the shed. Packed dirt, No grass at all down the center of it, the kind of trail that only comes from a lot of feet over a lot of time. I hadn't noticed it in the spring with Delroy, but it was unmistakable now. And at the base of the salt shed's rear wall, where the wall met the concrete pad it sat on, there was a steel plate set flush into the concrete. A hatch, painted the exact gray of the wall, so that from more than a few feet away, it disappeared into the shadow of the overhang. You'd never see it unless you were standing right on top of it, looking straight down. It had a recessed ring pull, sitting flush so it wouldn't catch a boot, and a small placard, weathered but readable, that said, County Shelter, CAP 40. And below that, stamped into the metal, 107. I did not open it. I want to be honest that in that moment, I was not brave. I stood over that hatch on a bright Saturday morning, with birds going in the fence line and traffic hissing past on 9 behind me, and every reasonable explanation I'd been carrying, the typo, the shorted sensor, the mislinked record, the coordinates off by 100 feet, went quiet all at once, and I felt the specific cold of a fact that won't fit anywhere. Delroy and I had stood on this exact spot in the spring. We had both looked at it. There had been nothing here. I had photos on my tablet, time-stamped from that day, of empty gravel and the blank back wall of that shed. I crouched down and I put my hand flat on the steel. It was cold, colder than the morning, the way concrete underground stays cold. And under my palm I could feel, faint, coming up through the metal, a movement of air, ventilation. There was a vent somewhere below, and it was breathing. I went home. I didn't tell anyone. I spent the whole weekend building a case for how I'd missed it before. That a gray hatch on a gray pad in the shadow of an overhang is genuinely easy to walk past. That Delroy hadn't looked carefully because he was humoring me. That we'd both scanned the corner for a structure and not for a hole in the ground. All of that is true. People miss what they're not looking for. There's a whole body of research on it. I almost believed myself, but I kept coming back to the occupancy reading. 31 people during the warning. 0 minutes after the all clear. Not a stuck sensor reading a constant number. A count that went up when the sirens ran and emptied out when they stopped. Monday, I went into the records with a different question. Not, is this shelter real, which I no longer knew how to answer, but when does this shelter exist? I pulled the full activity log on 107, every single entry the system had ever recorded against that number going back to the earliest data we had, and I exported all of it to a spreadsheet, and I sat with it for most of a day with my office door shut. The pattern took a while to see, because the entries were sparse and scattered across decades, but it was there, and once I saw it I couldn't unsee it. Shelter 107 had reported occupancy exactly 41 times in the entire recorded history of the county's data. Every single one of those 41 reports fell on a day with an active tornado warning for our specific county. Not a watch, a warning, the real thing, the one that means it's on the ground or about to be. The occupancy would climb during the warning window and drop to 0 within a few minutes of the all clear, every time, without exception. And on every other day in the record, every clear day, every day of ordinary rain, every day with a watch but no warning, the shelter reported absolutely nothing, because on those days I was now fairly sure it simply was not there. That was the first real answer, and like everything else in this thing, it only made the questions bigger. Because 41 warnings across the county's whole digital history is not that many. We don't get that many true warnings. And when I lined the dates up against the county's actual warning history from the Weather Service archive, they matched. Every one of the 41 landed on a confirmed warning day. But some of those dates went back further than our monitoring hardware could possibly have existed. There were occupancy reports logged against 107 from years before the county owned a single door sensor, from before the database even had an occupancy field, sitting there clean and formatted as though they'd always been there. Backfilled, as if someone or something had reached back through the whole history of the record and written itself in, so that it would never look out of place to anyone who went looking, so that a careful person like me, checking, would find a record that behaved exactly like a real one. I brought it to Carol, I tried to do it the right way. I printed the log, I highlighted the correlation in yellow, I lined it up against the weather archive, and I put the whole thing on her desk and asked her, plainly, what Shelter 107 actually was. And this is the part I keep returning to because her face changed, and it was not surprise. She looked tired. She looked like a person who had spent years hoping this particular conversation would not have to happen on her watch and had just watched that hope run out. She got up and she closed her office door, which she had never once done with me in the time I'd worked there, and she sat back down, and the first thing she asked me was whether I'd opened the hatch. I said no. She said good. She said don't. And then she told me a version of it. Not all of it. I'm certain now she didn't know all of it, that nobody living does. But a version. She said the shelter had been in the registry since before her time. Before Hollis's time. Since before anyone currently drawing a county paycheck was born. She said every director going back at least to the 60s had been told the same thing by the one before them. Handed down like a key to a room nobody opens. 107 takes care of itself. You leave it in the system. You do not remove it, and you do not send anyone to inspect it. That was why Hollis never mentioned it to me. He hadn't forgotten it. He'd been told to leave it off my rotation, and he had, and he'd probably hoped I'd never run the reconciliation report that caught it. She said the one time a director actually tried to have it decommissioned, early 90s, a man who didn't believe in handed-down superstitions and wanted the books clean. The paperwork went through, the number was deleted, the record scrubbed. And during the next warning, 11 people who had gone to their own registered, inspected, approved shelters did not come home. Their shelters failed. A roof lifted, a wall sheared, a door that should have latched didn't. 11, she said, in one afternoon, in a county that in a genuinely bad year loses one, maybe two. And after that the number was quietly restored to the registry, and the man who deleted it retired early and did not talk about why, and the next director learned the rule, and it had held ever since. Leave 107 active, let it hold its 40, and the county's real shelters, the ones I inspected, the ones with addresses and owners and cracks I could measure with a gauge, they hold. I asked her what she thought it actually was. She was quiet for a while. Then she said she'd stopped asking herself that a long time ago because there was no answer that let her keep doing her job, and doing her job saved real people. She said the only thing that mattered was the arithmetic, and the arithmetic was plain. The county did better with it in the system than without it. That was the whole of what she knew, and the whole of what she was willing to know. And then she said, the thing that has stayed with me longer than anything else in this entire business. She looked right at me, and she said, your job is to make sure the shelters are safe for the people who go into them. That one's already safe. It's the only one I never have to worry about. I should have left it there. I had an answer that worked. I had a director I respected telling me plainly to leave it alone, with a body count attached to the last person who didn't. I had a rule that had held for half a century and 11 graves explaining why. Any sensible person stops there. And for a few weeks I did. I went back to my real shelters, my seams and my vents and my capacity ratings, and I tried to let the arithmetic be enough. But I couldn't get past one number. 40. The capacity was 40, and I had watched it read 31, and when I went back through all 41 occupancy events in the log, not one of them ever hit 40. They hovered. 28, 33, 19, 31, 26. Close, some of them. Never full. And I realized that in 6 years of this job, in a county small enough that everyone's business is half public, I had never once heard a living soul mention writing out a warning in a shelter behind the salt shed on Highway 9. When our real shelters fill up, you hear about it for weeks. The church basement that took 60, the school gym that held a whole neighborhood, the family that squeezed 9 people and 2 dogs into a space rated for 6. People tell those stories. Nobody had ever told a story about 107. Because nobody from here goes into it. And if nobody from here goes into it, then the 31, the 26, the 19, those were somebody. Just not anybody I could name. So the last thing I did, and the reason I don't do this job anymore, was I decided to be there during a warning. Not to open the hatch. I had learned that much. Just to see. Just to watch it happen with my own eyes. Because I'm the kind of person who apparently cannot leave a blank field in a record. And this was the last blank field. We got the chance in early July. A line of storms had been producing all afternoon out to the west, dropping funnels on the next county over, walking toward us. I was already parked on the shoulder of Highway 9 with the maintenance yard in front of me, before the warning even dropped, listening to the weather radio narrate the thing coming. When the warning finally came for our county, the sirens started up behind me in town, that long falling wail that gets into your back teeth, and the wind came across the fields hard enough to rock the truck on its springs. The sky over the yard went the color of a deep bruise, that yellow-green that means hail, and the light got strange and flat the way it does when the pressure drops. And the shelter was there. The corner of the yard that had been empty gravel and weeds had a low concrete structure standing up out of it, an entry stairwell going down into the ground, a heavy steel door standing open at the bottom, and a dim yellow light coming up from inside. It was simply there, not shimmering, not fading in, nothing dramatic. It was there the plain way a building is there, when you have never had any reason to doubt that it exists. If I hadn't stood on that empty ground myself, I'd have driven past it 1,000 times and thought nothing of it. And people were going in. That's the part I can't put down, the part I'll be carrying when I'm an old man. From the fields, from the tree line at the back of the yard, from the direction of a farm road that I know for a fact does not run out that way, people were coming, walking toward the open door. Men and women, a few smaller shapes moving among them that were children, one being carried, and they weren't running. Nobody runs toward that door. They walk the way you walk toward something that has been expecting you for a long time, and that you have finally, after putting it off, come to meet, unhurried, certain. In a wind that was bending the fence and driving grit against my windshield, they walked at the pace of people with all the time in the world, and one by one they went down the stair and through the door into the yellow light. I started counting them, because counting is what I do. It's the shape my mind takes under pressure. I got to 26 before the rain came down all at once like a dropped curtain and took the entire yard out of view, and the last thing I saw before the gray closed over it was the open door and the light, and one more figure stepping down toward it. I did not go to the door. I have turned that decision over every single day since, asking whether it was cowardice or whether it was the one genuinely sane act in a life full of small, ordinary, brave ones, and I still don't have a verdict I trust. I sat in my truck with the wipers slapping uselessly and the weather radio telling me in its flat computer voice to take shelter immediately. And I did not take shelter, because the only shelter within reach of me was that one, and I understood then, completely, in a way that went past thinking, that it was not for me. That door was open, and I could have walked to it, and some part of me wanted to, but it was not holding a place for me, and I knew it the way you know which of two doors is yours. The all clear came at 6:15. The rain thinned out and then stopped, and the light came back up ordinary and gray. And the northeast corner of the yard was gravel and weeds and the blank back wall of the salt shed. No structure, no stair, no door, no light, just the packed dirt path through the flattened weeds, worn smooth by feet I had now watched with my own eyes and would never be able to name. I filed my resignation the following week. Carol didn't try very hard to talk me out of it. I think honestly she was a little relieved to have one fewer living person who knew, one fewer point where the thing could get poked. Before I cleared out my desk, I did one last thing, and I did it carefully, the way I did everything in that job. I opened the record for Shelter 107 and I made absolutely certain it was flagged active, verified, capacity 40, and I wrote into the notes field, in plain language that no reconciliation report and no clean books director could misread. Do not remove, do not inspect, verified active. I want whoever comes after me to leave it alone. I want them to find that note the way I should have found one, and to be spared the walk out to that corner. I want the arithmetic to keep working. I still live in this county. I never left. My own registered shelter is a good one. I inspected it myself. the door seals, the latch, the vent pipe clear, the capacity honest against the space. It will hold, I have no doubt at all that it will hold. But now, when the warning comes and the sky goes that flat green, and the sirens start up and I go down into my own concrete box to wait it out, I don't think about the storm. I think about the other people. The ones walking calm through the wind toward the open door behind the salt shed, unhurried, certain, carrying their children toward a yellow light in a shelter that is only there when the worst is coming. I think about how the county does better with them than without them, and how 11 people once paid for someone forgetting that. And most of all, I think about the number, because I never could stop thinking about the number. The readings never hit 40. There is always room. 26 that July, 31 in May, 19, once, on a night decades before I was born. Never the full 40. There are always empty places being held open down there. And I can't stop wondering what those empty places are for, who they're waiting on, whether a shelter like that fills slowly, over years, over lifetimes, one warning at a time, and whether one of these seasons, when the siren falls off into that low moan and I'm counting the seconds alone in the dark of my own good shelter, I'll feel it, the pull, the unhurried certainty settling into me that my shelter, the one I sealed and rated and trusted with my own hands, is not the one I'm supposed to be in after all. I check my latches more than I used to, every warning, twice. I tell myself that's the thing keeping me on this side of the ground. I tell myself the arithmetic is fine, that the number belongs to other people, that I watched from the truck and the truck is where I belong. But every warning, the number has room. And every warning, I sit in the dark and wait to find out if this is the season it starts counting me.